welcome back. Today we are going to be doing our music production basics for beginners. Today we are going to be doing EQ tutorial. So EQ is equalization, and at its bare basics, what you're doing is taking different frequency bands and either boosting them or cutting them. So what we're going to do here is I've got a little guitar loop pulled over from our Apple Loop library. I'm working in Logic. This is going to apply to any software that you're working with. Everything's going to have a built-in EQ plugin. In Logic, I can either click our EQ button right there, or I could go in to our EQ section, and you can see there's a few options. So this is a pretty standard looking EQ window. In this particular one, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bands. So each of these little dots I can drag up or down. I can make them wider or narrower, and this is going to be the band of frequencies that I am adjusting. So this one that I've got selected here, right now it's right at 2 kilohertz, and it stretches all the way down. We've got a little bit still at the 500 mark, a little bit still at the 7500 hertz mark. We can make this more of a broad stroke band or more narrow. So this parameter is called our Q, and it's basically how wide the individual band is. You can drag the band so that the center of the band is at different points in the frequency range. And we can also change how high the peak or valley of our boost or cut get. So we're going to put that back down to 0. Let's take a quick listen to our guitar track to see what it sounds like initially. Now you can see that we are getting an analysis of the frequency range of this sound. So this is a very rich acoustic guitar. We've got a lot in the bass, even down to the 20 hertz sub-bass region. We've got a lot of information in the mid-range, going all the way up to the upper mids and even some of these high frequencies. To give a little bit more context on hertz, human hearing on average starts around 20 hertz and ends at about 20,000 hertz or 20 kilohertz. Now as you get older, you tend to lose some of your high frequency hearing. I'm in my mid-20s. I can hear up to around 18 kilohertz pretty well. The more loud stuff you listen to, the more of this high frequency hearing you lose. So that's something to keep in mind. So let's play this and just let's turn on a couple of bands and just listen through to what it's doing to the sound. So let's let this play. So you can see with this and I'm doing very dramatic boosts and cuts here, just so that it's very obvious to hear through YouTube exactly what it's doing to the sound. You can see this boost as I drag it up. Let's start it down here. You can hear the full sweep of me boosting all these frequencies up and down. Similarly, let's start at the bottom and do a cut all the way through. Now, something you might notice right off the bat is the boost was a lot more kind of noticeable, to me at least, than the cuts. So let's talk about how we might use an EQ strategically. In general, and remember there's no rules with this, it depends on the individual sound that you're EQing, it depends on the song. In general, I tend to boost sounds that I like and I tend to cut sounds that either aren't good or are clashing with other instruments. So for example, in this particular guitar, maybe I really want a little bit more upper mids. Like I want more of a sparkly kind of sound. I want to really boost those upper frequencies and have the guitar pop out in that upper register to make our track sound interesting. Now, similarly, if I've got something like a bass, and I didn't really try to match these up. This is just another loop that's in the same key. So let's take a listen to a bass real quick. This is still analyzing our acoustic, even though it's muted. Let's go to our bass and put an EQ on here. Now you can see that our bass is really living in this, kind of 50 to 200 hertz range. So I might want to boost this section to have our bass pop out in our bass area, and I might want to cut our guitar up to where the bass ends. And what that's going to do is open up, and these don't sound great together, I know, but what this is doing is really opening up our mix. It's preventing clashing between instruments. It's adding cohesion because our mind is more easily able to separate the sounds if they're not interfering with each other in that band. So the next thing I want to show you is the different types of bands you can have. So we've got these general kind of boost or cut nodes, and then you can see I used a cut. So on the cut, it's not just how much you're boosting or cutting, but it's a certain amount of decibels per octave. So in this particular EQ, that goes from 6, which is a very mild cut. It's more of sort of a shelf, which we'll get into next, all the way up to 48 is going to basically make it completely silent. So I tend to pretty much just use the maximum setting here, and I just cut all the way. And what this is going to do is just high pass or low cut anything behind the line. Similarly, we can do a high cut or a low pass, and we can cut out all of our, and you can see it's interacting with this other node. Let's go ahead and turn that one off. And let's play around with our high pass and our low pass cuts to sort of get an idea of how those sound. So we can use our cuts to really define a hard frequency range that we want to allow through the EQ. The third and final type of band in this type of EQ is a shelf. This allows us to give a broad boost or cut to a range. So let's turn off our cuts, and you can see our shelves. We can basically choose the range we want to boost and the range we want to cut, and same thing on the other side. So to recap, we've got our standard bands for typical boosts and cuts. You want to boost stuff that sounds cool. You want to cut stuff that's getting in the way. We've got our high pass and low pass, which let you cut off at either a low point or a high point on the other end. And then we've got a shelf for a broad, low or high frequency range boost or cut. So this is a standard sort of very typical, very common EQ. A lot of them look like this. There are better EQs than what you can get stock. For example, FabFilter has excellent EQ plugins. They've got dynamic EQ, so something you can do is take a a band and say, I only want to apply this boost if this frequency hits a certain dynamic threshold. So you can only cut if it gets a little too loud, for example. So that's some of the more advanced things you can do. This is not the only type of EQ you can see. Here's another couple I've got here. So this is another stock Logic EQ. You can see each of these bands. You don't get as much control as you do with the channel EQ here. This graphic EQ, though, lets you say, I want to take 125 hertz, boost it or cut it, 250 hertz, boost it or cut it, etc. We can add a little bit of limiting as a side effect of this plugin, so we can do a little bit of volume as well. Another type of EQ is something like a Pultec. This is not a stock Logic plugin, but it's something that you might see. This is based off of this is a simulation of a hardware EQ module. It's got two bands. You can either boost or attenuate, which is cut. You can set either a very sharp or a very broad EQ. So this is the width of the band. And then using these knobs, we can say 3 kilohertz up to 16 kilohertz, 20 hertz up to 100 hertz. Here's where I want it to work. And that about wraps it up. That is the bare basics of EQ. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you are EQing aggressively in all of your songs. If you found this helpful, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the video and the channel grow. If you have any questions or want to correct me on anything, feel free to hit me up in the comments. I will respond to each and every one, and I will see you next time. Have a wonderful day, evening, morning, whenever you may be watching this, and goodbye.